Welcome to today's seminar, Why Collective Impact and Why Now? Hi everyone, my name is Paul Bourne and I'm joined today by Melody Barnes. Melody is chair of the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions, CEO of Melody Barnes Solutions, a domestic strategy firm, Vice Provost for Global Student Leadership Initiatives, and Senior Fellow at the Robert F. Wagner School of Public Service at New York University. From 2009 until 2012, Melody was assistant to U.S. President Barack Obama and director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. In this role, she provided strategic advice to President Obama and worked closely with members of cabinet to coordinate the domestic policy agenda across the administration. Under her leadership, innovative new policies, practices, and partnerships were initiated to address significant national challenges in the areas of education, healthcare, and the federal government's relationship with local governments and communities. She also provided leadership for the White House Council for Community Solutions, which adopted collective impact as a key understanding for change. Melody currently resides in Washington, D.C. with her husband, Marlon Buckner. Melody, thank you so much for joining us on the call today.
It is such a pleasure to be with you and to be on the call with everyone who's joined us. I'm really excited about the level of participation, so thank you so much for inviting me.
It's been wonderful following your career, and just want to say right at the beginning of this call a huge thank you to you and to Barack Obama and others in the United States for putting together the White House Council for Community Solutions. I can't tell you how inspiring that was for us here in Canada.
Well, thank you. It's one of the things that I'm most proud of from my 3 years working in the White House. And to the extent that even after leaving, I've been able to continue that work and work that I'm doing now at the Aspen Institute. So it's gratifying to be part of this movement because I believe, that it is a significant strategy for bringing about the kind of change that we want to see in our communities, whether in the United States or in Canada or other parts of the world.
Well, let's talk about that, Melody. So what do you understand collective impact to be now? Like it became this force, this idea. And do you think it's kind of evolved now since you first heard about it? I mean, I'm sure you could actually remember the meeting that you first heard about it. Matter of fact, it's well recorded.
You're absolutely right. I mean, and kind of before it had a name, it was an understanding about its impact in communities. And in some ways it started, and hopefully we can talk about this a little bit later, but it was rooted in the fact that the president would always say the best ideas are being formed outside of Washington, D.C. So let's get a better understanding of what those ideas are and how communities are attacking those problems. And collective impact ultimately was the name that was put on what we were seeing, which was a very disciplined form of community collaboration. I mean, we know that it has 5 very distinct elements to it. And we also know, however, that collaboration isn't new. There was no sense that we were discovering fire and the wheel, that people had been collaborating for quite some time, that people had been forming partnerships across sectors for some time. But what we saw was the fact that the most successful communities were doing something that was very, very specific when they were able to be successful and attack the big challenges in front of them, that they were forming a shared or a common agenda. And I think all of us on the call can think about the times when we were working with someone and we all thought we were pulling the wagon in the same direction, and somewhere along the way we realized that we were moving in 4 or 5 different directions, and obviously you can't achieve your goal, you can't get over the finish line if you're not all pulling the same direction. So that common agenda is one of the key elements of collective impact. And also this idea of shared measurement systems. Again, understanding the problem, but also understanding how communities were going about confronting the problem, an agreed upon way to measure what they wanted to achieve and measure benchmarks along the way and collect data to do that was something that we saw happening in the most successful communities. And certainly this idea of mutually reinforcing activities. Again, everyone doesn't have to be doing the exact same thing. In fact, they shouldn't in cross-sector collaboration. But the idea that the many pieces are working in an organized and collaborative way, that they were reinforcing one another in an effort to move to that goal was something that's critical. And fourth, this idea of continuous communication. And we know this, even from our own personal relationships, that if you aren't constantly communicating, then there's the reality that you can move off track. So we could see the entities that were working together toward this big goal in constant communication to ensure that they understood where they were, what one another was doing, and that they were still moving in the right direction. And then finally, this critical idea of a backbone institution or organization, that entity that would orchestrate the work that was happening, because you have so many different pieces that were moving in a coordinated fashion. And that backbone was critical, and the elements of what a backbone is and what a backbone isn't were also things that we found to be important. So those were the pieces that we were seeing and understood to be collective impact in the work that I was doing at the White House. And you all, FSG, the White House Council, and others continue to deepen that work. Now the White House Council has taken on, its work is being done in really the name of the Aspen Institute. We picked up that mantle at the Aspen Institute, and to help new communities better understand how to engage and how to build a field so that we can support each other and we can advance this strategy much more quickly.
And who would have known when you were first introduced to these ideas? And I remember when John Kanya came and spoke to the White House Council for Community Solutions and just sort of introduced it, and the paper had just come out at the Stanford Social Innovation, and it was catching fire everywhere. And I remember that watching the video of that presentation, because so many of those meetings were recorded, and who would have thought at that point that in the first 2 months of the Collective Impact Forum that Aspen is involved in with FSG, that you received 5,000 people signing up as members. So it's taking off all over the world. It's thrilling to see this kind of consensus. And I think for most of us, it's not so much that it's just a new idea that we love. It actually makes so much sense based on what we've all known for so long.
Right. I think you're exactly right about that. And in fact, the piece that John and his colleagues wrote that was in the Stanford Social Innovation Review about collective impact, I think it remains to this day the most widely read, widely shared article that was in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. Now, we all acknowledge, Stanford Social Innovation Review isn't the New York Times or, one of the big Toronto newspapers, but it does, I think, underscore the fact that people are really hungering for these smart ideas and a discipline around these ideas to be able to move forward, because people see the challenges in their communities that aren't being otherwise solved. And a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of very smart people, and indeed a lot of very smart, effective programs have been out there for quite some time. But what we're finding is that if we're going to affect change, really complex problems, and we're doing it at scale, that we need the elements of collective impact if we're going to do that successfully. I think that's why we see the number of people engaged in the Collective Impact Forum, why people were sharing that article so widely, why we're having this conversation across our borders.
Absolutely. Melody, we were all a little bit surprised when you left the White House, and I had this great pleasure of meeting with you in the West Wing, one of the great moments of my career.
Oh, well, thank you.
I enjoyed that so much. And then, what I think surprised us is you didn't just go to another corporate board. I mean, you started to want to take this work further, and you've put a lot of energy in the Aspen Institute's Forum for Community Solutions. And give us a little bit of your background. Like, was that kind of a natural shift for you? How did you sort of come to this work and this understanding, and why have you become so passionate about it?
Sure. Well, I started in public policy a couple of decades ago because of my passion to affect change and to bring about positive change, particularly for the most vulnerable communities in the United States in particular. And I wanted to be able to do that on a large scale, which was why I was attracted to work in the federal government. And my experiences in the federal government, working in the House of Representatives, the Senate, in particular my work with Senator Kennedy as his chief counsel for many years, was very satisfying in that way, and we could see change come about. But that has become increasingly challenging in Washington. I mean, it's something you hear President Obama and others speaking of quite frequently. It still does happen. It still is possible, but it has certainly become more difficult. And this idea that the President articulated when he was running in 2008 that we discussed as we were forming the White House Council for Community Solutions, that change lies within all of us and in our communities, and that people are doing really smart things, working across the ideological spectrum, across sector lines, was very, very attractive to me. It resonated with me. It struck a chord in me on a personal level. So to be able to bring that conversation into my work at the White House and to study these communities that were doing such wonderful things, and we could see the change off their baseline. You know, it was widely reported, I think, just this past year, a work that we studied, for example, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that had one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the country. You know, they started out wanting to focus on issues of poverty and realized that they had to deal with their teen pregnancy problem, and using this collective impact strategy, they've seen dramatic change. You know, we can talk about the Strive Network. We can talk about Project U-Turn in Philadelphia. You all can talk about the work that you're seeing in communities that you work with as well. And there's something that's very fulfilling about that for me personally, but as someone who loves public policy, as someone who wants to, again, go back to what brought me into public life originally, affecting change for the most vulnerable communities, being able to use the strategy, to advance the strategy so that it is more widely used, was something that I just didn't want to give up just because I was making a change in my career. So starting this work at the Aspen Institute, fantastic staff, Steve Patrick, who used to be at the Gates Foundation, who's the executive director, Monique Miles, who's the deputy director there, now allows me to continue that work, which fulfills something that is important to me personally, but I also think doing that in collaboration with you, with United Way, with FSG, with so many people, will allow us to accomplish something that we collectively believe is important as well.
It starts to make a lot more sense in terms of the work that you've done, and particularly your passion for large-scale change. I'm also so glad that you mentioned Steve and Monique, two of my favorite people, and I just wanted to mention that and say that. But, you know, I go back, and I think of all the issues you covered at the White House Council for Community Solutions. You know, so many, and there's so many things you could have done. And again, you know, it was in Canada, Tamarack was releasing these documents continuously and trying to engage us in this learning and following it, almost like with bated breath after every session. And then we kind of went, at the end, because you essentially narrowed it down to two things. One was that you wanted to advance collective impact so that every community in America would have access to this understanding. And two, that you wanted to talk about Opportunities Youth. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to ask you about Opportunities Youth in a moment. But start with that, you know, that understanding. What was compelling about this way of thinking, the collective impact way of thinking, versus other opportunities you had to promote ideas? And you're clearly the highest profile panel in the history of community work, and you chose collective impact.
Bottom line, because it's successful. Obviously, we have a lot more work to do. There's a lot more measurement that we have to do and refinement of the work that's underway. And when we talk about the work with Opportunity Youth, we can go more deeply into this because not only do we believe we're helping in those communities and helping those young people working with them, but we're also learning more about what works and what doesn't and why. But we can see the change. So, for example, we all know, or many people know, the Strive network story. It's one of the communities that we studied when I was at the White House. They saw in their communities in Cincinnati and in northern Kentucky that students were just leaving high school and they were not prepared to go on to higher education. They weren't prepared to go on to a career. Using the collective impact strategy, they saw a 10% increase in graduation rates in Cincinnati since 2003, a 16% increase in college enrollment in Covington, Kentucky since 2004. We saw the same thing in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, when we were studying the work there. And again, they were looking at graduation rates that were as low as 50%. There is no way, as an individual matter, for personal economic security, as a community matter, or for the country, that you can have graduation rates that low and expect you can have a vibrant and vital economy. Again, using this collective impact strategy, they saw a 6% in graduation rates within a 5-year period. That may sound small to some people, but that is dramatic change. And we saw that over and over and over again and across a number of different issues. So the fact that there's a strategy that can be applied to a range of big, complex societal issues, and we can see success. And as you say, in many ways it resides on something that's common sense, I think, to many of us. That was very, very attractive to me, and that's why I wanted to do the work to continue to advance that.
I love your answer, Melody, and I'm particularly struck with the ease by which you can use numbers, 10%, 16%, 6%, like clearly, highly defined. We know what the change is. We know it's systemic. We know it's large scale. I think that's what sets collective impact apart. In Canada here, we've been working at poverty reduction through our Vibrant Communities Canada approach, Cities Reducing Poverty, and it's been a fascinating undertaking. But, the same thing, we've been using this collective impact approach, and in St. John, when we started, 27% poverty. Today, 18%. Hamilton, highest rate of child poverty in the country. 7 years later, they're in the lowest 10%. So we can actually look at real numbers and real outcomes, which is one of the things that's so interesting about collective impact. We're not only looking to get a common agenda, we're also looking to get a shared measurement system in place so that we can truly understand and focus. Maybe that's even more than anything, and get those numbers down.
Exactly. And I think to your point about measurement, that's one of the things that's very important to us in our work at the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. And in particular with our first incentive fund, which, as you said, focuses on Opportunity Youth, because we know from talking to the communities that we studied when I was still at the White House that the data systems, the measurement, the support for the backbone institution, those are some of the most critical elements that it allows you to coordinate the work and to be successful, and it tells you whether or not you're moving in the right direction and toward your goal. But it's also the work that is toughest to fund. It is the work that, I often call it the unsexy work, but it is critical to getting it done. And to be able to support those parts of the work, we think, help to advance the collective impact agenda overall.
Very good. For those that are listening in, we already have some questions coming in. I've got a question here from Rebecca Gilman and another one from Kirsten Manley. We'll be going, Manley Casimir. We'll be going to those questions momentarily. I just have a couple of more questions for Melody, but please do send us your questions, and we will be asking these of Melody in just a moment. Melody, I want you to talk a little bit about your Opportunity Youth Network. I know that there's a lot of people coming to the Collective Impact Summit in Canada that are very interested in this work. Mm-hmm. And first of all, help us understand, what do we mean by Opportunity Youth?
Sure.
And what are you hearing from the 21-plus communities that are now involved in it?
Absolutely. Opportunity Youth is a phrase that the White House Council really started to coin and to promote. And that was because it's language that we took from our engagement and our conversations with young people themselves. I mean, many people think of what we call opportunity youth, they call disconnected youth. They're 16 to 24-year-olds, disconnected from education systems, disconnected from employment. They may have dropped out of high school. They may have received, in the U.S., a GED, so passed an assessment indicating that they have the skills of having completed high school, but that's it. They haven't gone on to get some kind of 2-year or 4-year credential or certificate in post-secondary education, and they aren't attached to a job that provides a family-sustaining wage. But in spite of all of those hurdles, when we talk to these young people, they are so hopeful. You know, they express a desire to complete their education, to be connected to their communities, to national service, to give back, to raise their families, to have a good job, all of the things that we think of that are so important and make a society, a community vibrant. And we also understood from an economic survey that we did that the problem, the challenge of not reattaching these young people, working with them so that they can go back to school and attach to employment, was costing the United States about $95 billion annually. Wow. So not only are there moral issues, not only are there individual issues in terms of helping people fulfill their dreams and their potential, but it was a huge economic drag on the economy. And that's the reason why we at the White House started to look at this challenge as the first one that we wanted to take on. And when we started the work at Aspen, we decided that we should continue that work and create what we call now an Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund to support cross-sector collaboratives using a collective impact model that are specifically designed to build pathways through education and to employment for opportunity youth. And over the course of the last 2 years, we opened the gates to a number of communities doing this work. We ultimately selected 21 communities that we could work with. And we just announced in the last month another round of grants, of implementation grants, to 19 of those communities to do the work. And the other 2 communities we're continuing to work with, but to help them continue to refine the pathways that they're building. So it's very, very exciting, and we're learning a lot from them. We're hearing from them that they're using data to guide and inform their decision-making, that it's helping them better understand where opportunity youth reside in their communities, their attainment level, degree attainment level for higher education, and what the struggle is there. It's helping them to understand how to get the right stakeholders at the table in a cross-sector collaborative. It's also helping them engage youth in an authentic way. This can't just be something that is for youth. It has to be about and with youth at the same time. So we're learning a lot from their engagement, and we're also seeing some early policy wins and financing wins from local communities that are supporting these collaboratives, that are passing public policy that aid in the attainment of higher education degrees and credentials. I could go on, and I'm happy to discuss that further, but I just wanted to give a sample of some of the things that we're hearing and seeing as a result of the work.
What a passionate answer. When you talk about collective impact, I'm just so engaged, and then all of a sudden you go to Opportunity Youth and you just take it up a notch, and it's amazing, and it's just, it feels to me like we could have a whole generation disengaged, and in a sense feeling like instead of calling it opportunity to youth, there's no opportunity for youth, That's often the feeling out there. And then often I hear in Canada, where people feel like all the money is being spent on seniors, and youth aren't getting jobs, and they're not being able to buy houses, and they're not being able to do a whole lot of different things. So I think this is one of the most important focuses of our time, is to ensure that this generation of youth are highly engaged. So I applaud that, and so looking forward to hearing more about that at the Collective Impact Summit here in Toronto, Canada. Talking about that Collective Impact Summit, and then we're going to go into questions from listeners.
Mm-hmm.
We're thrilled to have you there, and you're opening the session for us. Now, this is a week-long event, 5 days. It's intense. It's exciting. It's iterative. It's interactive. It's all those things that create a learning community. And we've been running these types of events for 11 years now. John Kanya will be following you the next day. Brenda Zimmerman, one of the leading complexity theorists, but also one of the most profound researchers around using collective impact and complexity thinking around health outcomes. And then Jay Connor, one of the sort of godfathers of this thinking, are all on stage during that week. What we're really thrilled about is that you're able to open that session by inspiring us about why this work is so important and why it's so important now. Right? The world is in quite a state, and some of us try to remain really optimistic, but there's a lot of reason for pessimism, and we look toward collective impact as a coming together of some really important ideas and giving us some new hope. And you're going to be able to share that with us and open that for us. Give us a little flavor of some of your thinking, particularly as it relates to the issues of our time.
Well, this is why I'm really excited to be with you in Toronto, because we're at such an important moment right now because of the challenges are so big, they're so grave, and my guess is that many who are on the line with us today feel the way that I felt many times. It feels like you just keep running into that wall, and the political system is not moving fast enough or aggressively enough to address those challenges. But when I see the work that's happening in local communities, and I see the level of commitment and the dedication and the sweat equity that's being put into these cross-sector collaboratives, and using, as we've discussed, this very disciplined way of attacking those problems, I am hopeful and even more motivated. And when I talk to the young people that we work with, even more so. So I want to talk to everyone gathered there about what we've learned to date, because I think that there are some exciting and important lessons. And one of the things that we want to do is to share that information so that we don't have to repeat mistakes and that we can accelerate successes. So I want to talk about that and why we believe we're seeing those advances. I want to also talk about building the field. And I think that this is very, very important because you were talking about collective impact and when it first came on the scene. And I think some people thought, oh, this is the phrase of the day, the flavor of the month. But for good reason, it's had sticking power. But anything that's going to last for the future, we have to have a field to support it. So for philanthropists, for local communities, for the collaboratives, and others, we're looking for ways to provide tools and support to share information, to really, again, build a field to support the work and to advance it much more quickly. And then to talk about what's needed. Because we are learning so much and we're learning it together, I think it's important to talk about what different sectors, different actors, need from them if we're going to continue to advance this work. So I hope it will be a combination, hopeful message, and hopeful because I really see that in the work, but also something that people can walk away from and understand based on what we've learned, what we believe will be critical if we're going to continue to advance this and do it in an accelerated way.
Oh, I'm wishing we were closer to that date. I can hardly wait for this presentation and to engage with you. And of course, after the session, people will be able to sign up for a smaller group process with you where they can do a Q&A. So I'm very excited about that as well. Melody, I can't say thank you enough for this interview and for answering all these questions. I want to now go to the questions that listeners are presenting to us, and we have quite a few here. Most of these are of a technical nature, wanting to kind of know how collective impact works and what we should do about it. Let's start with one from Rebecca Gillum. She writes, the components of collective impact are certainly important, but at the core of this work is the strength of relationships among people. Mm-hmm. How do you address this in your work?
One, she could not be more correct. And we've talked a lot about this, both internally and also as we've been working with our communities. And there is a roundtable discussion that I moderated that's now, I think, it's part of an insert in the Stanford Social Innovation Review where we talk about this. And as to attach this question to the elements, so for example, the common agenda. We can't walk into a community and say, hi, we're here to give you your common agenda. Instead, that has to happen very organically. It has to happen as a result of those in the community talking and sharing with one another. Trust and respect are an essential element of this work, and without it, you can see the hiccups. In the communities and the collaboratives that we've been working with, we have seen them working to build that, and it's something that simply takes time. We've also said that to our funders as we're doing the work, that even though it sounds amorphous, even though it is intangible in some ways, creating the basis for that kind of trust is critical if the rest of the work is to go on. And that, we have to foster and support an environment where that can happen. That's certainly where the communication efforts come into play. And I think it also is important when we think about the backbone organization. And FSG has done some really important work writing and talking about this. And as I alluded to before, distinguishing between what is and isn't a backbone. A backbone is not, hi, I'm the leader and I'm here to tell you what to do. It is an orchestral or coordination function. And again, that entity has to be one that is trusted by the others so that they can do their work and feel supported. Sometimes it isn't the big name in town or, the person that is often seen, at the microphone or on the stage, but it is the entity that has the trust and also has access to the resources to be able to support the others in the community. So absolutely right about the relationship. That takes time, and it has to be fostered and nurtured, and people have to understand that it is a critical element of the work.
Fantastic. Great answer. So let's go to another one that's kind of tailor-made for you, having to negotiate and try to bridge all of those messy moments with Republicans while you were in the White House. Mm-hmm. Here we've got a question from Kirsten Manley-Casimir. And Sarah has another question around shared measurement, but this one's very interesting because she says, how do you establish a common agenda when the sides start in very different places? For example, in the context of indigenous state relationships where there is a history of harm and disparate visions of the future. And if you can't establish a shared vision, is collective impact not possible as a strategy? It's a tough question.
Sure. I think that unless you have that common agenda, you don't have an essential element for collective impact. I don't think it is possible to move toward a goal if the goal hasn't been agreed upon, and really agreed upon and discussed, disaggregated, so that everyone has a full understanding of what's being accomplished. I mean, it's like saying we're going out west. You know, if I'm in the United States, and some people think that means we're going to San Francisco, and some people think that means we're going to Kansas City, and others think that means we're going to Vancouver. We're going to end up in different directions, and it also means that we haven't aligned our activities, those mutually reinforcing activities that I discussed. It means that it's very hard to measure what we're trying to achieve along the way. So I think that that's critical. To get there, and different communities get there in different ways. And what we've seen is communities at different levels of maturation in terms of using collective impact as a strategy. We were very specific about working with urban, rural, and tribal communities as part of our larger portfolio. And they, as we've talked about this goal for opportunity youth, for example, have said to us, this is what the goal of creating a pathway for education and employment means to us in our local community. Or we believe we first have to focus on challenges with the foster care system or challenges with the juvenile justice system. But that is a process of those organizations coming together and working through sometimes a longer-term process to arrive at those goals, and to do that very clearly.
And, you know, we've seen in community after community, just because people are at that level of disagreement, it doesn't mean they can't come together. And it just takes a bit longer, and it takes a very focused process and outcome. And the hope of a collective impact is often what drives people to common agendas.
I think that's right. And, you know, I alluded before to the work that's taking place in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that's, I think, a great example. It's a community that started out saying, we want to address issues of poverty. And literally, some of the nonprofits and other leaders in the community opened the newspaper and started seeing data on their teen pregnancy rate and realized, oh my gosh, this is something that we have to address first. In the course of doing that, some of the members of the original collaborative started to leave. That isn't an issue they wanted to take on, or they didn't want to take it on in the way that others believed was necessary if they were going to be effective. So it reshaped the collaborative in that community. But ultimately, through that process of working, narrowing the issue, refining the issue, and coming to agreement on what that common agenda was going to be, they developed a collaborative, a goal, a set of activities, measurement, et cetera, that have gotten them to really quite remarkable, a quite remarkable place and highly successful in what they were trying to achieve, in addition to the fact that now that muscle has been exercised and the community is saying, okay, so what do we need to do? What can we take on next?
Melody, we have a lot of questions to go through, so we're going to go through these a lot quicker now, I think. We have a fabulous question, and I know that you've just hosted a funders forum up at Aspen, and here's an individual, Hadil Quadzaz, Q-A-Z-Z-A-Z. What changes in mentality, modes of practice, and competition around funding are needed to have genuine collective impact?
Great question, Hadil. We brought together the Funder Collaborative in partnership with others that Paul just mentioned to do that. In part, some of our funders have talked to us about the need to think differently about the way they fund, both patient money as well as money that goes to some of the very needed elements of collective impact, like data measurement, like the backbone institutions. And we see that as an important part of the field that will continue to be developed. And if you go to our collectiveimpact.org website, you can see that there's a specific breakout for funders so that they can continue to develop their thinking on this as well.
Excellent. A question from Sandy Heyerbacher. I'm pronouncing last names mainly for comic effect here. I'm not very good at name pronouncing, but Sandy has a great question. Very excited about collective impact. However, a common concern I hear is that by focusing so much on stakeholder organizations, collective impact can inadvertently leave out community or citizen voices that should be part of goal setting, measurement, etc. What is being done to make sure citizens are engaged from the start in collective impact efforts? And I just want to assure Sandy that Melody worked with some good people at the White House. Both Barack Obama and Michelle Obama are fans and students of John McKnight. So this area of bringing the citizen voice in is well entrenched in the thinking there. But Melody, your thoughts on this?
Right. And
citizen voice.
Sure. And it's one of the things, Sandy, again, I'll refer you also to this roundtable we did, and the transcript is in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. We talk a lot about that. And Rich Harwood from the Harwood Institute, for example, was a part of that conversation and talking about the work that has to take place to ensure that community voice is there, because otherwise it's like the organism rejects the answer or the solution or the cure if, in fact, the community hasn't been a part of it. So, that's my 10th grade science attempt to use an analogy. But unless the community is confident and a part of that solution, for one thing, you don't often actually have the solution to the challenge you're trying to solve, and you don't get the stickiness that you believe is necessary. So part of the work we're doing, we've also tried to include community-based organizations that are really indigenous to the community, grassroots, community foundations as well, so that the work can continue on even after the Aspen Forum's resources have run out based on the agreement that we have with these communities. So we think it's absolutely critical.
Question by Jan Bowler. What advice do you have for us in academia about introducing and integrating the collective impact model into our curriculum?
That's an interesting question. I think academics can be important to not only the study of this work and helping us understand, second, third, fourth order questions, but also sharing and disseminating that information widely and working with collaboratives to further what's happening in local communities. I've also found, because I spent some time at New York University, that young people, well, to me, I just had my 50th birthday, so they're feeling young to me, but the students that I encounter are highly interested in collective impact as a strategy. It really strikes a chord with them. So I think getting their voices and their engagement and their activism while also doing the research and the study and working with collaboratives would be a terrific input.
Fantastic. Question from Liz Granat. Can you highlight a couple of the most innovative strategies that communities receiving the Opportunity Youth Grants plan to implement?
Well, we're very excited because when we look at the Opportunity Youth, the challenges associated with Opportunity Youth, you see the places where they fall between the cracks over and over. So the work that's happening with the foster care system in some of our communities, for example, is very, very exciting. Similarly, many of you may be aware of the President's call for action with boys and men of color. Several communities, while working with the Opportunity Youth population more broadly, are also specifically looking at this issue of young men of color. In Maine, we saw the collaborative as being really instrumental in helping to pass legislation. So the policy work that's underway, that's important. In this case, it was legislation that's specifically focused on foster children and ensures that they're able to stay in foster care longer if they're also enrolling in continuing education. So we're seeing policy advances, we're seeing financing wins, and we're seeing kind of some of the issues for populations within the broader opportunity youth spectrum specifically being addressed.
Question from Thomas Williams. In some communities, there are established social service systems that may not be working well, yet people working in those systems may be uncomfortable with the changes required to work in collaboration with other siloed systems. Can you share some ideas about how to address the silo walls, especially when the silos are supported by political leaders, universities, and nonprofits?
Wow, that's a great question, and is in many ways, I think, at the heart of what we're trying to do in silo busting with collective impact and bringing or helping to encourage and support the cross-sector table. In some places, for example, we've seen important data challenges, and the inability to follow and to track what's happening to young people as they move from system to system, foster care to juvenile justice into the school system is a real barrier. There are, in some cases, privacy issues that are also important to consider, and we are watching communities try and take on some of those issues. These are big challenges that did not form overnight. So in many cases, people are taking a segment of the problem and saying, okay, we're first going to address this piece of the problem, and then that will help us move forward. And in doing that, it also engenders trust that we've talked about, starts to engender success, which often breeds more success. So I think the bottom line is that we're seeing people do this piece by piece, based on the biggest challenges that they are seeing in their communities, and bringing local government actors, nonprofit, business sector, and others to the table to try and do it.
Excellent. Question from Karen Erickson. Is there any collective impact work being done in Africa or other developing countries?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure that there are others who do. I can tell you, I was doing a presentation, and Queen Noor was there, and she approached me and said, the work that you are doing on collective impact and with Opportunity Youth would be wonderful to take to other parts of the world, to the Middle East. It specifically was the area that she was focusing on for obvious reasons. So I think there's probably potential interest there. I don't know what work may be taking place there already, but certainly, John and others at FSG probably can answer that question.
Yeah, and Karen, I'd suggest that you go to Collective Impact Forum, just collectiveimpactforum.org, and type in Africa on the search engine. I know that there are members from Africa, and they might be following the work or they may be doing work. I also don't have specific examples, but I know that there are members from Africa in that forum. Again, it's an excellent resource, and I know that for any of you who've asked questions, there are many answers there as well. Okay, we've got time for a couple of more questions. A very specific question, and I think you'll enjoy this one, Melody, because it kind of brings out the consultant in all of us. Diane Elliott, we have formed a small and diverse group to begin discussions re the issue we feel that we need to address as a community. We feel that we have agreed on an issue that encompasses many of the seemingly different issues each of us has raised, kind of found a common ground. Mm-hmm. We have decided to keep this group small while we do some research. We hope this will guide us to be intentional and informed in inviting others to build this collaborative. Is this an appropriate way to move forward, or is not having more people at these meetings this early going to cause a problem for us?
That is a great question, and I think part of the answer is situational. I mean, without knowing, the issue or the community or the size of the community. But I think, it's critical in the context of collective impact to have, one, we were just talking about community voice and community perspective and its importance. So making sure that that is a part of the work that's being done. I also think, again, we're talking about cross-sector collaboration, so thinking about the relevant sectors to doing the work, and also thinking about who else may be out there already who's engaged in this work. Who else may think that they or already have a collaborative established, and is there potential to work together? We saw that in some of the communities that we started to work in, and encouraged them, not forced, but encouraged them to talk to one another to see if there's the possibility of coming together. So I would think through those kinds of issues to determine whether or not you feel if you're on firm foundation in doing that.
Great answer. And the one thing I would add is just to make sure that we are having a solid community engagement strategy going while we're having our conversations. So set up community conversations, talk to different people. Even though you might not be bringing them into the central group, it really helps to be constantly moving outwards. Otherwise, one of the risks is that we become too internal and trying to get our own ideas straight before we're hearing other ideas. Melody, I can't say thank you enough for coming and joining us today on this beautiful Friday morning, and just really looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. You brought us the history of this work, sort of where it came from, why it was embedded there, gave us a lot of context, obviously major inspiration to go deeper and think deeper about this work. And then surprisingly, you've got so much breadth that you can go right down into the small issues and help us think about how to actually implement this work. So I just want to say a huge thanks, an applause from all of us online for your work, and look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.
Well, thank you. I want to say words of appreciation to you for your work, the work of Tamarack, and to everyone who's on this call and expressing an interest, who's already deeply engaged, or in cases of some of the questioners, newly engaged in their communities on this work as well. You are doing something important, and I look forward to engaging with you all when we are in Toronto for the beautiful falls that Paul has promised us all. We can count on that, I'm sure, so that we can deepen our conversation. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. In a few days, we're going to email all of you with links to the webinar recording and other material related to today's call. We also welcome your feedback on these calls, so please do email Tamarack to let us know how we're doing at Tamarack at tamarackcommunity.ca. If you're interested, and we really hope you are, in going deeper on collective impact, the place to do it is at Tamarack's Collective Impact Summit, happening October 6th to 10th. We are filling up very, very fast. Melody will be our opening keynote on Monday, October 6th. You can learn more about this event at www.collectiveimpactsummit.com, or look for our follow-up email to this webinar where more information will be provided for you. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.